I was sitting in the doctor's waiting room when my phone rang. I glanced at the screen and saw my daughter-in-law's name. Her voice came through, cold and sharp like a knife cutting through the quiet air. "Oh, you don't know? We're going on a trip to Europe tomorrow. Your $7 million oceanfront mansion and your car have been sold. Bye." And she hung up just like that. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I felt the walls of that room close in on me. And then, as if to make sure I heard her right, she added, "We gave you 20%. Be grateful." Behind her words, I could hear my son's silence. Nathan was there. I knew it, but he said nothing. My son, who once clung to my hand at the beach, stood mute while his wife announced the end of everything I held dear. That was the moment my world cracked open. My mansion by the ocean wasn't just a house. It was the soul of my marriage, the years I spent with Richard, my late husband, and the place where I imagined I would end my days surrounded by family. And now, with one cold call, it was ripped away from me by the very people who should have cherished me most. Before I go on, let me say this. My name is Lydia Montgomery. I am 71 years old, a widow, a mother, and I thought a grandmother-to-be in a loving family. I was wrong. What I'm about to tell you is not just a story about money or property. It is about betrayal that cuts deeper than any wound, and how a woman who seemed fragile learned to fight back in ways no one expected. Remember to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below if you want to hear more Grandma Life stories filled with emotion, betrayal, and unexpected strength. I sat frozen in that chair while Vanessa, my daughter-in-law, continued her speech. Her tone was dripping with condescension. "Nathan and I are moving to Europe. We'll live a real life there, not tied down by your dusty traditions. You can keep whatever little we left you." Then she laughed, a laugh that made my skin prickle. "You should be thankful, Lydia. Most women your age don't get anything at all." Thankful. That word struck me harder than the announcement itself. Thankful that she sold my house without my knowledge. Thankful that my son stood behind her like a shadow, not a man. I gripped my phone so tight my knuckles turned white. I wanted to scream, but all that came out was a shaky breath. When she finally hung up, I lowered the phone into my lap and stared at the floor tiles. The chatter of other patients faded, replaced by the crashing of imaginary waves in my head. The ocean had always been my teacher. It taught me that storms come suddenly, violently, and you cannot stop them. But storms also pass, the waves retreat, and they always return. I thought of Richard then, my husband who had built that mansion with his bare hands, his sweat, his dreams, his quiet promise that I would never be alone. He was gone now, buried on a hill that overlooked the sea, but his presence never left me. If he were alive, he would never have allowed this. He would have faced Vanessa with calm authority, and Nathan would never have dared stand in silence. But Richard was gone, and all I had was their betrayal. As I rose from the waiting room chair, my legs felt weak, but something else stirred inside me, something I had not felt in years. A slow, burning ember that whispered, "They think I am weak. They think I am finished. They are wrong." I walked out of the clinic, the phone still in my hand. The salt air hit my face as I reached the street. My mansion, my ocean, my memories, it all rushed back in a flood. That house was more than bricks and wood. It was the rhythm of my life, the dignity Richard and I had built together. And I knew, deep in my bones, that no one, no daughter-in-law, no silence from my son, would take that away from me without a fight. That night, I sat by my window with the ocean spread before me, its waves restless and loud. I thought about what Vanessa had said, about their new life in Europe, about being thankful. The bitterness rose like bile, but I swallowed it. I would not waste myself on screaming or pleading, not with her, not even with Nathan. Instead, I listened to the waves. They reminded me that time is patient, and dignity does not vanish because someone claims to sell it. Vanessa thought she had struck the final blow. Nathan thought he could hide behind her, but they forgot one thing. The mansion wasn't theirs to sell. And as I sat there in the dark, watching the ocean crash against the shore, I whispered to myself, this is not the end. This is only the beginning. When I finally made it back home that evening, the mansion looked different to me. The white walls seemed dimmer, the windows stared like empty eyes, and even the sound of the waves felt heavy with grief. I stood in the doorway for a long time, remembering how this place had once pulsed with laughter, the smell of fresh bread from the kitchen, and Richard's humming voice as he worked on some repair I had begged him to leave to the contractors. But Richard never trusted strangers with the heart of his house. He always said, "This is ours, Lydia. Every nail, every beam, every view of the ocean belongs to us." Now the silence pressed against me. I wandered to the parlor and sank into the old chair Richard had loved. My hand brushed over the worn armrest, and I felt the sting of tears. I let them come, for there was no one to see. As the tears blurred my sight, a memory rose so vividly I almost smelled the salt of that day. It was the morning Richard died. The sun had been merciless, beating down on us as we walked from the car into the hospital. His hand trembled in mine, but his grip was steady, like he wanted to keep me anchored. "Don't be afraid," he had whispered, though we both knew the truth. He was going, and I could not follow. When he was gone, the mansion became a monument to his love and my solitude. After his funeral, Nathan and Vanessa started coming around more often. At first, I thought it was kindness. Vanessa brought me flowers, Nathan carried groceries inside, and they sat with me in the evenings. She asked polite questions about my health, my sleep, my mood. Nathan nodded along, his eyes wandering to the high ceilings, the antique frames, the endless horizon out the window. I see it clearly now, but at that time, blinded by grief, I thought they were simply trying to keep me company. One evening, not long after Richard's passing, Vanessa leaned close to Nathan when they thought I wasn't listening. "Imagine what we could do with a place like this," she said. Nathan didn't answer, but his silence, even then, was louder than her words. I pulled myself back into the present, wiping my eyes. My gaze drifted to the mantel above the fireplace. That's when I saw it again, the thick, cream-colored envelope Richard had given me months before he died. He had pressed it into my hands one evening as the sun sank over the water. His voice had been low, serious in a way that made me uneasy. "Open it only when you feel ready," he had said. I tucked it away that night and never touched it. Now, sitting there with betrayal still echoing in my ears, I felt ready. I rose, my heart pounding, and walked to the mantel. The envelope was still there, tucked behind a faded photograph of our wedding day. My fingers shook as I pulled it free. The paper was heavy, the seal unbroken, like it had been waiting patiently for this exact moment. I hesitated. Outside, the waves crashed hard, as if urging me forward. Slowly, I slid my finger under the flap and tore it open. Inside was a single piece of stationery in Richard's neat, deliberate handwriting. My breath caught as I read the first line. "If you are reading this, it means I am no longer there to protect you. But know this, Lydia, you are not alone." I prepared for this. I pressed the paper to my chest, his voice alive in my mind. The scent of him seemed to drift from the page, faint but real, like salt and cedar. I closed my eyes and let myself feel him near. For the first time since Vanessa's call, I felt something other than despair. I felt a flicker of hope. I folded the letter carefully and returned it to the envelope. Whatever secrets Richard had left for me, I would uncover them. I owed him that, and I owed myself more than tears and silence. The night stretched on, and I sat by the window watching the restless sea. Nathan and Vanessa thought they had cornered me. They thought they had stripped me of my power, of my dignity, but Richard's letter told me there was more than I knew, more than they could ever imagine. I whispered into the darkness, as if Richard could still hear me. "You built something I never saw, didn't you? Something hidden, something strong." The waves roared back their answer. I did not sleep that night. Richard's letter rested on the table beside me, its words circling in my mind like gulls over the shore. I prepared for this. That sentence was not a comfort. It was a summons. He had left me something, and I needed to find out what it was. By dawn, my resolve was set. I brewed a pot of coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and spread the letter flat. My eyes scanned it again and again, looking for meaning in the curves of his handwriting. At the bottom, I noticed a line I had overlooked in my grief. Inside the study, top drawer of the mahogany desk. You'll know what to do. I rose with sudden energy and went to Richard's study. The room had been untouched since the day he passed. The air was stale, filled with the scent of old leather and wood polish. His chair still faced the window, as if he might return at any moment and continue his quiet work. I crossed the room and pulled open the drawer he had mentioned. Inside, I found a plain black folder bound with a thin leather strap. My hands trembled as I undid it. The folder was thick with papers. The first page bore the name of a company I had never heard before, Riverside Trust. My pulse quickened. Line after line of legal text stared back at me, dense and overwhelming, but the meaning became clear as I read. Richard had not left the mansion in my name directly. He had placed it, along with a list of other properties, under this trust, and the sole owner of that trust was me. I gasped and dropped the paper onto the desk. I gathered the others quickly, my eyes scanning the addresses. 2 apartments downtown, a strip of rental homes, a small office building, and then finally, the line that struck me hardest. Montgomery Oceanfront Mansion, Charleston. Every property was tied to my name, my signature, my authority. I sat back in the chair, the weight of revelation pressing into me. All these years, Richard had been preparing in silence. He must have known Nathan's weakness, Vanessa's hunger. He must have seen the storm long before I did. And instead of telling me, he had built this fortress quietly, brick by brick, so that when they came for me, I would not be defenseless. For the first time in weeks, I laughed. It was not a bitter laugh, but a laugh of disbelief and relief. "You clever man," I whispered to the empty room. You knew all along." I spent hours reading through the documents. The trust was airtight, the signatures firm, the dates spanning years. Richard had not left anything to chance. Vanessa could gloat, Nathan could stay silent, but the truth was simple. They had no power over me. They had sold a house that was never theirs to sell. My fingers brushed across the embossed seal of the trust, and tears welled again, but this time from pride. Richard had trusted me with more than memories. He had trusted me with the fortress of his life's work. I felt his presence as though he stood behind me, resting a reassuring hand on my shoulder. By late afternoon, the fear that had gripped me the night before had transformed into a quiet strength. I carefully placed the documents back in the folder and locked it in the desk. I did not know what tomorrow would bring, but I knew one thing with certainty. Vanessa and Nathan believed they had triumphed, but they had only exposed their own ignorance. I walked to the window and gazed out at the ocean. The waves were rising, crashing harder against the shore. They mirrored the storm that was building inside me. For 71 years, I had lived as a dutiful wife, a gentle mother, a quiet widow. But now, with Richard's hidden fortress revealed, I felt something I had long forgotten. I felt power. I pressed my hand against the glass and whispered, "This house is mine. This life is mine. And they will soon learn what that means." The following morning, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt since Richard's passing. The black folder lay beside me on the nightstand, heavy not just with papers, but with promise. I dressed carefully, pulling on a navy cardigan Richard had always admired, and slipped the folder into my leather bag. Today was not a day for mourning. Today was a day for action. I called the number written in the corner of one of the documents. It belonged to a law office in town, one Richard had quietly worked with for years. A calm voice answered, and, after hearing my name, immediately transferred me to someone who introduced herself as Ms. Delgado. Her voice was steady, firm, and without hesitation, she invited me to bring the documents in. "I handle elder rights and estate protections," she explained. "Your husband was very wise to set this up. Come see me." By noon, I found myself sitting in her office, sunlight streaming through tall windows onto shelves of law books. Ms. Delgado was younger than I expected, perhaps in her 40s, with dark eyes that missed nothing and a presence that felt both professional and personal. She motioned for me to hand over the folder. I did, watching as she flipped through the papers with swift, confident hands. After several minutes, she looked up. "Mrs. Montgomery, these documents are solid. Your husband created a trust in your sole name. That mansion, and the other properties listed here, belong to you. No one else has any legal standing to sell them without your signed approval." I exhaled, my body releasing tension I hadn't realized I'd been holding. "So Vanessa's claim, the sale?" My voice trailed off, still thick with disbelief. Ms. Delgado shook her head, almost amused. "It's meaningless. Whoever bought that house has no legal claim. The transaction will collapse once this trust is presented. In fact, we can file for immediate reversal and damages if necessary." She leaned forward, her tone sharpened. "Mrs. Montgomery, your daughter-in-law committed fraud, pure and simple." The word fraud rolled through the air like thunder. I sat straighter, my hands gripping the edge of my chair. Fraud. It wasn't just betrayal of family anymore. It was a crime, something that could not be brushed aside as a misunderstanding. Vanessa had crossed a line. "What happens now?" I asked quietly. Ms. Delgado smiled, a smile that carried both reassurance and strategy. "Now we begin the process of restoration. I'll file the paperwork today. The mansion will legally return to you within days. But I suggest, if you're willing, that we keep this confidential until the right moment. Let them believe they've succeeded. Sometimes silence is the sharpest weapon." Her words echoed in me, filling the hollow places that betrayal had carved. Let them believe, yes. Let Vanessa strut with pride. Let Nathan stay blind in his wife's shadow. Their own arrogance would be their undoing. I nodded slowly. "Yes, keep it quiet. Let them think they've won." Ms. Delgado tapped the folder, her eyes steady on mine. "Good. Then when the truth comes, it will be undeniable." Leaving her office, I felt lighter, though the weight of the bag remained. The streets of Charleston bustled with their usual rhythm, but to me, everything looked sharper, clearer. The betrayal that had broken me just days before now seemed like the spark of something greater. I wasn't just a widow clinging to memories anymore. I was a woman with knowledge, with proof, with an ally. When I arrived back at the mansion, I stood at the threshold and let the ocean wind sweep over me. The house seemed to breathe again, as though it knew it had been restored. Vanessa thought she had stripped me of dignity. Nathan thought he had hidden behind silence. But dignity does not vanish when stolen. It waits to be reclaimed. For a brief moment, I let myself believe the storm was passing. But storms don't end just because you find shelter. They gather strength, they circle back. And this one had a name: Marco Rossi. 2 days after meeting Ms. Delgado, I received a call that chilled me in a different way. The voice was deep, rough, carrying the casual menace of a man who had spent years making others tremble. "Mrs. Montgomery, you may not know me, but your son does. My name is Marco Rossi. Nathan owes me, and when I don't get what I'm owed, I collect in other ways." He paused, as though savoring my silence. "Do yourself a favor. Ask him what he's promised me." I hung up, my heart pounding, my breath shallow. I felt the world tilt again. My son, my Nathan, entangled with a man like that? The thought twisted inside me like a knife. That night, I couldn't sit still. I paced the mansion halls, remembering Nathan as a boy, running barefoot along the beach, his laughter echoing against the waves. How had that child grown into a man who hid behind his wife and signed his name to debts he could never pay? I didn't have to wait long for answers. The next morning, Vanessa called me, her voice trembling under a mask of anger. "Some thug showed up here, Lydia. He claims Nathan owes him money. Lies. Absolute lies." I heard Nathan in the background, his voice hushed, frantic. Rossi wasn't lying. I knew it. Later that day, I saw them. Vanessa's heels clicked furiously on the pavement as she stormed toward me, Nathan trailing behind, his face pale and damp with sweat. She didn't bother with pleasantries. "Do you know what this man wants? He says Nathan borrowed against the mansion, against your house." She spat the word as if it burned her tongue. "Can you believe that?" I studied her, but it was Nathan's eyes that gave it away. He couldn't meet my gaze. He shifted from foot to foot, his lips pressed tight. Guilt hung off him like a heavy coat. "Is it true?" I asked him quietly. He swallowed hard. His voice cracked when he finally answered. I thought it was just paperwork. Rossi said it was a bridge loan. He promised we'd pay it back once the sale went through." I closed my eyes, the betrayal slicing deeper. My son, my only child, had offered up my home to a criminal. Not his house, not his wife's house, my house. Vanessa crossed her arms, glaring at Nathan. "You fool! Do you realize what you've done? That man will destroy us." "No," I corrected her softly, my voice steadier than I felt. "He will destroy you, not me." They both turned to me, shock flashing across their faces. For the first time, I saw fear in Vanessa's eyes, and it almost pleased me. She had built her arrogance on illusions, and now the cracks were widening. Before either of them could answer, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. Rossi stepped out, broad-shouldered, gold ring glinting in the sun. His presence made the air feel heavier, and every step he took seemed deliberate, meant to remind us of who held the power. He stopped in front of Nathan, towering over him. "You signed, Montgomery. Don't pretend otherwise." He pulled a folded document from his coat and slapped it against Nathan's chest. "Your signature is here, and you know what that means." Nathan's hands shook as he unfolded the paper. I glimpsed enough to see my address, my mansion, typed across the top. Rossi turned his gaze to me then, his eyes sharp. "Don't worry, Mrs. Montgomery. I'm a businessman, not a monster. I'll collect what's mine, one way or another." And with that, he returned to his car, leaving us standing in the shadow of his threat. Vanessa clutched Nathan's arm, fury spilling from her. "You've ruined us," she hissed. But Nathan only stared at the ground, broken, silent. I watched them, my heart torn between sorrow and something sharper, something fiercer. They were trapped now, not by me, but by their own greed and weakness. And as the ocean wind whipped around us, I understood Richard's plan more clearly than ever. He had built protections not just for me, but against the very downfall that was unfolding before my eyes. I turned away from them, walking back into the mansion with steady steps. The morning after Rossi's visit, the ocean sounded different. It wasn't the steady rhythm I had known all my life. It was louder, insistent, as if the waves themselves were knocking on my door, warning me that time was running out. I stood at the balcony, my shawl wrapped tight around my shoulders, staring out at the restless horizon. The mansion had always been my sanctuary, but now it felt like a stage, and I was no longer just the quiet widow in the wings. I was holding the script Richard had left me, and the time had come to play my part. I called Ms. Delgado early that morning. My voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. They involved Rossi. Nathan signed something he had no right to sign. What happens now? She did not sound surprised. I expected something like this. People who think they can cheat always borrow trouble from men like him. But listen carefully, Mrs. Montgomery. That paper Nathan signed means nothing. He cannot use the mansion as collateral because he never owned it. You are the sole trustee. Rossi has no legal ground. Hearing those words was like hearing a lock click open. My knees almost gave way with relief. Still, my voice stayed firm. So the mansion is safe? Yes, more than safe. With these documents, you could walk into any courtroom and Rossi would have to walk out empty-handed. Vanessa and Nathan may think they're clever, but all they've sold is smoke. I pressed the phone closer to my ear, the edges of Richard's black folder still on my lap. Then what should we do? Ms. Delgado's tone grew sharper, precise. We wait. Let them believe they hold the reins. People who live on lies always hang themselves with their own rope. When the time is right, we'll reveal the trust, and when we do, it will crush their schemes completely. But for now, silence is our strongest weapon. Do not confront them. Do not reveal what you know. Let them walk deeper into their illusion. Her words settled over me like a cloak. Silence. The very thing I had been mocked for all my life, being too quiet, too patient, too yielding, was about to become my greatest strength. Vanessa thought silence meant weakness. Nathan thought my quiet meant surrender. They had no idea silence was a storm waiting to break. That afternoon, Nathan appeared at my door alone. His face was gaunt, his shoulders slumped. He looked less like a grown man and more like the boy I used to scold for sneaking cookies before dinner. But the boy was gone, and in his place stood a man hollowed out by fear. "Mom," he began, his voice shaky. "I just need some time. Vanessa, she doesn't understand. Rossi is pressuring us. I thought if I signed, it would buy us a way out." "You thought wrong," I said evenly, my eyes locked on his. "You cannot sell what is not yours. You cannot give away what your father built for me." His lip trembled. "I didn't know about the trust." "Of course you didn't," I replied, almost gently. "Your father knew you too well. He loved you, Nathan, but he knew you would never stand strong against someone like Vanessa. That's why he built the fortress, to protect us both, to protect me." He sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. For a moment, I wanted to touch him, to comfort him the way I once did when nightmares kept him awake at night. But then I remembered the silence on the phone, the way he had stood behind Vanessa while she sold my life out from under me. My hand froze at my side. Love does not erase betrayal, not even between mother and son. "Rossi won't stop," Nathan whispered. "He'll come after me. And when he does," I said softly, "he'll discover he's been chasing a shadow. The mansion is mine. The trust is ironclad. You and Vanessa have nothing to offer him." His eyes lifted, red-rimmed and desperate. "Then help me, Mom. Please, don't let him destroy us." For a long moment I studied him. The boy I raised was still there, buried under fear and greed, but he was not gone. I sighed, a deep, weary sound. "I will not save you from your choices, Nathan, but I will protect what your father left me. That is where I stand." He lowered his head, his shoulders shaking. For the first time, I saw regret in him, raw and unhidden. But regret does not rebuild trust. It only lingers like salt on a wound. After he left, I sat again at the desk in Richard's study. I spread the documents before me, tracing the neat lines of his handwriting in the margins. It was as if he had known every step of this dance before it began. In his silence, he had given me strength, and now it was my turn to use it. I whispered into the empty room, the ocean roaring beyond the walls. "Not yet, not yet. The lesson isn't complete." The words felt strange on my lips, but they steadied me. I would not reveal the truth, not until the right moment. Vanessa needed to believe she had won. Nathan needed to feel the weight of his choices. Rossi needed to think he held the power. Only then, when their illusions reached their peak, would the truth strike hardest. That night, as I stood again at the balcony, the mansion behind me and the waves before me, I felt the shift inside. I was no longer the grieving widow, no longer the silent victim. I was the keeper of Richard's fortress, the guardian of his foresight, the strategist in a battle they didn't even know they had already lost. The ocean swelled and broke against the rocks, endless and relentless. News travels faster than the tide. By the time Nathan and Vanessa boarded their flight to Europe, whispers of their supposed triumph had already reached the edges of Charleston society. Vanessa made certain of that. She posted pictures on her social media, her manicured hand resting on a champagne flute, the caption declaring, "New life, new chapter, Europe awaits." She posed in designer coats she could never afford without selling my house. Her smile painted as if she had conquered the world. Friends congratulated her, strangers envied her. And all the while, I sat in my mansion, knowing it was a castle of cards waiting to fall. Ms. Delgado had warned me to stay silent, and I obeyed. Each morning, I walked the halls of my house, touching the walls, the banisters, the carved details Richard had insisted on preserving. Every inch whispered to me, "Hold fast. They do not know what they have done." The papers sat safely locked away, my weapon and my shield, waiting for the perfect moment. Across the ocean, however, their illusion began to crumble. I didn't hear it directly at first, but traces reached me in fragments. A frantic call from Nathan that I let ring unanswered. A message from a mutual acquaintance mentioning Vanessa's strange behavior at a dinner in Paris. The cracks were forming, and like water seeping into stone, those cracks would split them apart. It was Rossi who accelerated their downfall. He was not a patient man, and patience was never a virtue for someone who profited from fear. His shadow reached across the ocean just as easily as it loomed in Charleston. He had men who followed them, who reminded Nathan in hotel lobbies and street corners that his debt did not vanish with distance. He called Vanessa directly, his voice sharp as broken glass. "Your husband signed, sweetheart. You're living in hotels on my money. Pay me, or Europe becomes very small for you." Vanessa, for all her bravado, began to unravel. She had built her identity on power, control, appearances. But Rossi stripped those illusions away with every threat, every reminder that she was not untouchable. In London, she tried to pawn jewelry she had flaunted at parties, only to find it worth far less than she had imagined. In Milan, she begged Nathan to ask his weak mother for money, a plea I later discovered when Nathan left a message on my machine that ended in sobs instead of words. But the deepest fracture came when she learned Nathan had betrayed her too. For weeks he had promised her he was handling things, that Rossi would back down, that the papers he signed were temporary. Yet behind her back, he had signed more, loan extensions, side agreements, each one digging them deeper into Rossi's snare. One night in a rented Paris apartment, Vanessa found the documents tucked in his suitcase. The fury that erupted shook their fragile partnership to the core. "How could you?" she screamed at him, her voice echoing against thin walls. "You've chained us to that man. Do you realize what you've done to me? To us?" Nathan tried to defend himself, his voice weak, desperate. "I thought I could fix it, Vanessa. I thought once we had the money, once the sale cleared—" "The sale?" She cut him off, eyes blazing. "That house was never yours to sell, and you knew it. You knew it." Silence followed, the kind of silence that ends marriages. Across the ocean I felt the shift. I didn't need to hear every word. I knew my son's voice when it broke. I knew Vanessa's pride when it cracked. They were unraveling, just as Richard had foreseen. I stood on the balcony that night, the Atlantic dark and endless before me, and I whispered, "The tide is turning." Days later, another call came. Not from Vanessa, not from Nathan, but from Rossi himself. His tone was colder, more dangerous than before. "Your boy's a fool, Mrs. Montgomery. He tried to run from me, tried to hide behind his wife's skirts. But paper speaks louder than words, and his name is all over mine. I'll get what I'm owed." He paused, then chuckled low. "You sit in that big house thinking you're safe. Maybe you are. But your family? They're bleeding. And when people bleed, they crawl back home." He hung up before I could answer, leaving me with the steady pounding of my heart and the crash of waves outside. His words were cruel, but they carried truth. Vanessa and Nathan could not outrun what they had done. Sooner or later, they would return, broken and desperate. And when they did, I would be waiting. Vanessa's collapse came first. In photos, her eyes lost their luster, her hair unkempt despite expensive dye, her clothes wrinkled no matter how fine the fabric. Friends who once crowded her table in Paris began to vanish, unwilling to be tied to whispers of debt and scandal. She clung to Nathan, but he was unraveling faster, his shoulders bent under Rossi's threats. One evening, after another shouting match, he left her in a cheap flat with nothing but a half-empty suitcase and a shattered mirror. She woke to find him gone, his ring left on the nightstand like an apology. Alone and abandoned, Vanessa had nowhere to turn. The friends she had used shut their doors. The city she had bragged about exploring became a labyrinth of shame. And so she booked a flight home, her pride in tatters, her dreams dissolved. Meanwhile, I remained in the mansion, serene on the outside, a storm inside. I tended the garden Richard had planted, roses blooming stubbornly despite the salt air. Neighbors greeted me, unaware of the war playing out across continents. I smiled, nodded, kept my silence. Let them believe. Let Vanessa return to me hollowed out, stripped of the armor she thought would last forever. The ocean never lies. It takes and it returns. It erodes and it renews. Watching its endless cycle, I knew the moment was drawing near. My daughter-in-law had set this story in motion with her arrogance. My son had fueled it with his weakness, and Rossi had fanned its flames with his threats. When the knock came, it was not loud. It was faint, hesitant, the kind of knock made by someone unsure if they deserved to be answered at all. I had been sitting by the window with a cup of tea, the ocean's roar filling the silence of the house, when I heard it. At first I thought the wind was rattling the shutters, but then it came again, 3 soft taps. I rose slowly, my joints stiff from the weight of waiting, and went to the door. When I opened it, there she stood, Vanessa Montgomery. But she was not the woman who had called me weeks before with arrogance in her voice. She was not the woman who had posted photographs of herself in Paris, boasting about her new life. No, this woman was hollowed out, her makeup smudged, her hair limp, her clothes wrinkled and tired. The bright red heels she once paraded had been replaced by scuffed flats. Her eyes, once sharp with disdain, were sunken, rimmed in shadows. For a moment, we simply stared at each other. She clutched the handle of her small suitcase like it was the last thing tethering her to the earth. Then she whispered, "Lydia, please, I didn't know where else to go." I should have slammed the door. Part of me wanted to. I remembered every word she had spat at me, every sneer, every reminder that she believed I was weak and disposable. But another part of me, the part Richard always said was too forgiving, saw something else. This was not the conqueror. This was a woman stripped bare, carrying only shame and desperation. "Come in," I said softly, stepping aside. She entered slowly, her eyes darting around the mansion like she expected it to vanish before her. The air between us was thick with unspoken history. I led her to the sitting room where she sank onto the edge of the sofa, her shoulders trembling. For a long while, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the ocean pounding the shore outside, relentless and cold. Finally, she broke the silence. "Nathan left me." Her voice cracked on the word left. "He disappeared, took what little we had left. I woke up and he was gone. No note, nothing. Just his ring on the table." Her fingers fumbled in her pocket, pulling out the plain gold band. She placed it on the coffee table like it burned her skin. "I don't even know where he is." I watched her carefully. Her hands shook. Her breath came in shallow bursts. This was not an act. Pride had been peeled away layer by layer, leaving only a frightened, lonely woman. "Rossi?" I asked. She flinched at the name. "He found us everywhere. London, Milan, Paris. It didn't matter. There was always someone watching. Always a call in the middle of the night. Nathan promised he could fix it. He lied. He lied to me, to himself. And when I confronted him..." She stopped, biting her lip until it bled. "He left me to face it alone." A silence followed, heavy with everything she had never admitted before. Then she looked at me, her eyes filling with tears. "I thought I was strong. I thought I was clever. But I was wrong. I have nothing, Lydia. Nothing." Her words might have stirred pity in another woman, and yes, a part of me did feel it. But pity is not the same as forgiveness. I folded my hands in my lap, choosing my words carefully. "You have finally tasted the life you thought you were too good for. The hunger, the fear, the shame. Do you understand now what you tried to steal from me?" Her tears spilled over. She nodded quickly, like a child desperate to please. "I do. I swear I do. I don't know how to start again. Please, Lydia, let me stay here, just until I can find my footing." I leaned back, the ocean's rhythm thrumming in my ears. Richard's voice echoed in my memory, reminding me of the fortress he had built, the dignity he had sworn I would never lose. This was my moment. I could cast her out and leave her to the wolves. I could watch her sink as she once wished me to. But I did not. "You may stay," I said at last, my voice steady. "But do not mistake my kindness for forgetfulness. I have not forgotten what you did. You will not be treated as mistress here. You will live under my roof as a guest, nothing more, and you will earn your keep. The days of luxury are over." Her eyes widened in shock, but then she nodded, relief flooding her face. Yes, of course. Thank you." That night, I gave her the small room at the end of the hall, a room that once belonged to Nathan before he left for college. It was plain, furnished only with a bed, a desk, and a single lamp. As she unpacked her few belongings, I stood in the doorway watching her. She moved slowly, each gesture heavy with humiliation. Later, when the house was quiet, I returned to my own room and sat by the window. The ocean glimmered under the moonlight, vast and eternal. My heart was heavy, but not with despair, with resolve. Vanessa's fall had begun, and though she sat under my roof, she was not safe from the lessons that still waited. As I drifted into uneasy sleep, I whispered to Richard, "She is here, broken, but the lesson isn't finished, not yet." The mansion creaked with the night wind, the ocean thundered against the rocks, and somewhere inside those walls, Vanessa cried herself to sleep. The first morning with Vanessa under my roof was almost surreal. I awoke to the sound of movement in the kitchen, soft clatters that did not belong to me. For a moment, I thought I had dreamed everything, that Richard was alive and making coffee the way he used to. But when I walked in, I found her there, my daughter-in-law, the woman who had once declared my life irrelevant, now standing barefoot at my counter with a chipped mug in her hand. She looked smaller than I remembered. Her shoulders slumped, her eyes darted nervously as though she expected me to banish her at any moment. She had pulled her hair back in a loose knot, and without the mask of cosmetics, her face seemed years older. She gave me a timid smile. "I thought I'd make coffee. I wasn't sure how strong you like it." I sat at the table studying her. This was not the woman who had boasted about Parisian dinners and champagne fountains. This was a woman reduced to basics, her pride stripped bare. "Strong," I replied simply. She poured the steaming liquid into my cup, careful not to spill a drop. As she slid it across the table, I caught sight of her hands, red, raw, not from luxury, but from labor. She must have tried working, perhaps cleaning or waiting tables, things she would never have admitted in the past. The realization made me pause. For days, Vanessa moved through the mansion like a shadow. She washed dishes, swept floors, and even tended the small garden Richard had once loved. It was strange to see her kneeling in the soil, dirt on her hands, her red heels replaced by worn sneakers. She spoke little, and when she did, her voice lacked its former sharpness. I could almost believe she had changed. Almost. One evening, I found her in the study, the black folder still locked away in the desk where I kept Richard's papers. She wasn't touching it, but her eyes lingered on the drawers, as though she could sense something hidden. When she noticed me, she jumped back, her face flushed. "I was just looking at the books," she stammered. I didn't confront her. I only gave her a steady look and said, "The books are older than you realize. Handle them with care." Then I left her standing there, caught between curiosity and guilt. That night, while the house slept, I heard quiet footsteps again. I rose silently and followed the sound down the hall. Vanessa had slipped into the study. From the crack of the door, I saw her rifling through the shelves. My breath caught when she pulled a small wooden box from behind a stack of journals. She opened it, and inside was a flash drive, the one Richard had left labeled in his careful script, "Safety Vault." I stepped inside. "Looking for something?" She froze, the drive clutched in her hand, her face pale. I found it by accident, I swear." I walked forward slowly, my gaze never leaving hers. That box has been there for years. Nothing in this house appears by accident." She held the drive out like an offering. "Please, I wasn't trying to steal. I saw his handwriting. I thought maybe it was important." Her voice cracked, genuine fear in her tone. "I didn't mean—" I took the drive from her trembling fingers, my own hand steady. For a long moment, silence stretched between us, thick with all the things neither of us had said. Finally, I spoke. "Richard left pieces of himself everywhere in this house, but every piece has a purpose. If you found this, perhaps you were meant to. But understand, Vanessa, truth is heavier than any treasure. Are you ready for it?" Her lips parted, but no words came. She only nodded faintly, as if she had no strength left to argue. I left her standing in the study, her eyes wet with unshed tears. In my room, I turned the drive over in my hand, the label catching the light. Richard's presence filled the air again, the way it always did when I touched something he had left behind. I could almost hear him saying, "Patience, Lydia. Let them reveal themselves." The following day, I didn't mention the drive. I watched Vanessa go about her chores, quieter than before, humbled but restless. She no longer carried herself like a victor. She moved like a penitent, haunted by shadows she could not shake. And yet, even in her brokenness, I sensed the flicker of old ambition, the hunger that had driven her to betray me in the first place. That evening, as the sun bled into the ocean, I stood at the balcony and thought of everything that had led us here. My son lost to weakness, my daughter-in-law reduced to desperation, Rossi circling like a vulture, and Richard's hidden fortress waiting to be revealed. The story was building toward something inevitable. Behind me, Vanessa's voice was small, almost childlike. "Lydia, do you ever think people can change?" I didn't turn around. I kept my eyes on the horizon. "People can change," I said, "but consequences do not vanish. They wait." I heard her breath hitch, but she said nothing more. When the last light slipped into darkness, I whispered into the night, "The ocean teaches patience. Waves always return. So do lies." The morning light streamed through the tall windows of the study, casting long golden stripes across the floorboards. I held the flash drive Richard had left, its small weight pressing against my palm like a secret begging to be revealed. For days I had kept it close, hidden from Vanessa, yet I knew the time to open it had come. The moment felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, the sea raging below, knowing once I stepped forward, there would be no return. I waited until Vanessa returned from a short errand in town. She walked through the door with her usual hesitance, shoulders hunched, clutching a paper bag of groceries she could barely afford. She set them down on the counter, then froze when she saw the drive in my hand. Her eyes widened, and a hunger flickered there, the old spark I had always recognized. She didn't try to hide it. "Is that what I think it is?" she whispered. "Yes," I said calmly. "It's time." I led her to the car, neither of us speaking, as we drove into the city. The streets blurred past, Charleston's historic houses standing in quiet judgment as we made our way to the bank Richard had always used. When we arrived, the marble lobby gleamed under crystal chandeliers. Vanessa glanced around nervously, her hands twisting the strap of her purse. At the reception desk, I handed the flash drive to the manager, an older man with kind eyes who recognized Richard's name immediately. He led us into a private room where a sleek monitor and a heavy vault door waited. The air was cool, sterile, carrying the faint scent of metal and polished wood. The manager inserted the drive into the system. Within seconds, a set of encrypted instructions filled the screen. My heart hammered as he typed codes, each one unlocking another layer of Richard's foresight. Finally, the vault door clicked open, heavy bolts sliding back with a low rumble. Inside, the space was lined with shelves, and on the center table rested several velvet cases. The manager opened one and stepped back. My breath caught. Diamonds, sapphires, emeralds, all glittered under the fluorescent light, each piece more dazzling than the last. Necklaces, rings, brooches, Richard's quiet investments in beauty and security. Their value was beyond my imagination, millions hidden in plain sight. Beside me, Vanessa gasped. Her hand flew to her mouth, tears springing into her eyes. She reached forward but stopped herself, her fingers trembling just inches from the jewels. "My God," she whispered, her voice breaking. "This could save us. Lydia, please, you have to let me use them. Rossi won't stop until he's paid. Nathan is gone, but I'm still here. Please. If you sell just a few pieces, I can get him off our backs. I can finally breathe again." I studied her carefully. Her desperation was real, her voice raw with fear, but beneath it, I heard the same familiar note, the plea not for redemption, but for escape. Vanessa wanted relief, not change. "Do you know what these mean?" I asked quietly. "They mean freedom," she said quickly. "They mean survival. Lydia, if you ever had any mercy, let me take them. I swear I'll pay you back." I shook my head slowly, my eyes never leaving the sparkle of the jewels. "These are not for you, Vanessa. These were left by Richard, not as ransom for mistakes, but as proof of foresight. He didn't hide them so you could gamble them away to a loan shark. He left them so I would never be powerless, and I am not powerless now." Her face twisted, anguish spilling from her eyes. She dropped to her knees beside the table, her voice cracking. "I know what I did. I know I don't deserve your kindness. But I am begging you, Lydia. If I lose this chance, I lose everything. Please, please." I bent down, meeting her gaze with steady eyes. "You already lost everything, Vanessa. You lost it the moment you chose greed over family, the moment you saw me as an obstacle instead of a mother. What you're asking me for now isn't survival. It's another illusion, and I will not give you that." She sobbed, her hands clutching at the hem of my skirt before she pulled away, ashamed. Her once perfect composure was shattered, leaving only the raw edges of despair. I turned back to the manager, my voice calm. "Please reseal the vault. These remain where Richard intended." He nodded, closing the cases with care before locking them away. The heavy door groaned shut, the final click echoing through the room like a gavel striking judgment. As we left the bank, Vanessa walked beside me in silence, her face pale, her steps unsteady. I could feel the storm within her, rage, humiliation, sorrow, all colliding until she no longer knew who she was. The mighty daughter-in-law who once boasted of power was now reduced to begging at my feet, denied the jewels she believed would save her. When we returned to the mansion, she collapsed onto the sofa, her face buried in her hands. I stood by the window, gazing out at the endless expanse of sea. The waves crashed harder than ever, spraying white foam into the air. They reminded me that storms destroy, but they also cleanse. "Maybe these jewels are worth something," I said softly, letting the words hang in the air. Her head snapped up, her eyes wild with hope, but when she saw my expression, the hope drained away. She realized I had spoken not as a promise, but as a warning. The silence that followed was sharp, like the moment before thunder breaks. The mansion itself seemed to hold its breath. The evening settled over the mansion heavy and thick, the air dense with the scent of salt and roses from the garden outside. I had not spoken to Vanessa since the vault. She lingered in the parlor, pacing back and forth like a caged animal, her footsteps restless against the old hardwood floors. I sat at the kitchen table, the same place where I had once served her dinners, the same place where her laughter had dripped with contempt as she mocked my silence. Tonight it was my turn to speak. When I called her name, she entered the kitchen slowly, her eyes wary, her expression unreadable. The light above flickered, casting shadows that stretched long across the tiled floor. She stopped by the counter, standing with her arms crossed as if to shield herself. "Sit down," I said simply. She hesitated, then lowered herself into the chair across from me. For a long moment, we sat in silence. The only sound was the rhythmic crash of the waves beyond the walls, steady, unrelenting. I folded my hands, studying her. She looked smaller, diminished, a woman stripped of the weapons she had once wielded so easily. Finally, I asked, "Tell me, Vanessa, when you sold my house, Did you ever think about the years I spent building it? Did you think of the hours Richard worked, the sacrifices we made, the memories in every brick? Or did you see only numbers, only the price tag you thought would set you free? Her lips parted, but no words came. She looked away, her gaze dropping to the table as if it burned her. At last she whispered, "I thought you were weak." Her voice cracked, but she forced herself to continue. "I thought you would never fight back, that you would let us take it, because you had no strength left." Her honesty startled me. I had expected excuses, lies, perhaps even a desperate attempt to manipulate. Instead, she confessed. And in that confession, I saw the truth of her arrogance laid bare. "You thought wrong," I replied, my tone sharp as glass. "Weakness is not silence. Weakness is choosing greed over dignity, selfishness over family. You mistook my patience for surrender. But patience is not defeat. Patience is the storm that waits for the right moment to strike." She flinched at my words, her hands trembling on the table. "I was desperate," she said suddenly, her voice rising. "Do you think I didn't know what people said about me? That I married Nathan for money? That I wasn't good enough for your family? I wanted to prove them wrong. I wanted a life where no one could look down on me again. That house, it was my chance. And so you destroyed what little you had," I said. My voice was calm, steady, but inside I felt the weight of Richard's memory, of every sacrifice we had made. You sold not just walls and windows. You tried to sell dignity, history, love, but you cannot sell what was never yours. Her eyes filled with tears, but they were not the tears of regret. They were the tears of someone who finally saw her reflection for what it was, ugly with hunger, hollow with pride. She pushed back her chair suddenly, rising to her feet. "You don't understand. You never struggled. You had Richard. You had this house. You had everything handed to you." I stood as well, facing her across the table. My voice cut through her words like a blade. "Everything I have, I built beside Richard. Every piece of wood, every stone, every dollar earned came with sacrifice. I was a teacher before you ever knew Nathan. I saved, I endured, I supported his dreams. Nothing was handed to me, and even if it had been, it was earned with love, not deceit." She blinked, stunned into silence. For the first time since I had known her, she seemed to see me not as an obstacle, but as a force. "You believed taking this house would erase your fear of being small," I said softly, though my voice carried the weight of finality. "But fear does not vanish when you steal. It only grows. And now you live in it." She sank back into the chair, her face buried in her hands. Her sobs filled the kitchen, raw and broken. I did not move to comfort her. I stood tall, the walls of my mansion around me, the waves crashing in approval beyond. "You said I was weak," I continued, my voice steady. "But strength is not measured in who shouts the loudest or who spends the most. Strength is standing when others try to push you down. It is choosing dignity when others drag you through the mud. And that is something you will never understand until you face the wreckage of your own choices." Her sobs quieted, replaced by silence so thick it pressed against the walls. At last, she looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. "What are you going to do to me?" she whispered. I leaned forward, my eyes locking on hers. "I don't need to do anything to you, Vanessa. You've already done it to yourself. But know this, I will not let you destroy what Richard left me. And tomorrow the world will see the truth." She gasped softly, her breath catching as the meaning of my words sank in. The fear in her eyes told me she understood that her illusions were about to shatter. The kitchen seemed to exhale then, the house itself echoing with the memory of every meal, every word, every wound shared within these walls. I turned away, walking toward the doorway, leaving her slumped at the table in her defeat. Behind me, she whispered, almost too softly to hear, "I never hated you, Lydia. I only hated myself." I paused, but I did not look back. Some words come too late to matter. That night, as I stood again on the balcony, the ocean roared with a ferocity that shook the glass panes. The next morning dawned gray, the sky swollen with clouds that pressed heavy against the horizon. It was the kind of day when the sea seemed restless, waves rising higher as if echoing the storm inside my heart. I dressed carefully, pulling on a dark suit I had not worn since Richard's funeral. My reflection in the mirror was not the quiet widow I once saw. It was a woman standing on the edge of a battlefield, armed not with swords, but with truth. Miss Delgado had arranged everything. By mid-morning, I walked into her law office, its polished wooden floors gleaming, the air filled with the faint scent of ink and leather. In the conference room, a long mahogany table stretched across the space, set like a stage where the final act of this tragedy would play out. They were already there. Vanessa sat at one end, her face pale, her hands clasped tightly as if prayer could save her. Nathan sat beside her, his eyes downcast, the weight of shame etched into every line of his face. Rossi leaned casually in his chair, broad shoulders filling the space, his gold ring flashing as he tapped his fingers impatiently. His smirk told me he thought he was in control. I entered quietly, my presence drawing all eyes. I walked to the head of the table where Ms. Delgado stood, her files neatly arranged before her. She nodded at me, then addressed the room. "Thank you all for coming. We are here to resolve certain misunderstandings regarding the Montgomery estate." Vanessa's voice cut through the air, brittle and sharp. "There's nothing to resolve. Nathan and I already sold the mansion. It's done." Ms. Delgado raised an eyebrow, her tone precise. "Is that so? Then perhaps you'd like to explain how you sold something that never belonged to you." She opened the black folder, sliding papers across the table. "This is the trust Richard Montgomery established years before his death, Riverside Trust. The sole trustee and legal owner of the mansion, along with multiple other properties, is Mrs. Lydia Montgomery. Her signature is required for any sale. Neither of you had the authority to sign, which means the transaction you attempted is not only invalid, but fraudulent." The color drained from Vanessa's face. Nathan lifted his head, eyes wide, his lips parting as if to protest, but no words came. Rossi leaned forward, snatching one of the documents. His smirk faltered as he read the legal jargon. "This is impossible," Vanessa stammered, her voice rising in panic. We had contracts, buyers, everything." "And all of it worthless," Ms. Delgado interrupted coldly. "Paper without authority is nothing more than ink on a page." I finally spoke, my voice calm, but it carried through the room with a weight that silenced everyone. "You didn't sell my mansion. You sold your soul." The words hung in the air like thunder. Vanessa flinched, tears springing to her eyes. Nathan buried his face in his hands. Rossi slammed the paper down, his eyes narrowing. "So you're telling me this entire mess is useless? That the signatures mean nothing?" "Correct," Ms. Delgado replied firmly. "You pursued money through illegal promises. If you attempt to collect on these fraudulent contracts, I will see to it that law enforcement investigates your practices. I suspect your business could not survive that scrutiny." For the first time, Rossi looked unsettled. He leaned back slowly, his jaw tight, his gold ring glinting under the light. His bravado faltered, and I could see the calculation in his eyes. He had pushed too far and knew it. Vanessa turned to Nathan, her voice breaking. "You told me it was ours. You said—" "I thought it was," Nathan whispered, his voice raw. "I thought Dad left it to me. I thought—" He stopped, choking on his own words. His hands shook as he gripped the edge of the table. "I didn't know." "You didn't want to know," I said quietly. "You let her fill your head with lies, and you stood silent while she tore at the foundation of everything your father built. Silence can be betrayal too, Nathan." He looked at me then, his eyes red with tears. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry." Vanessa let out a bitter laugh, though it crumbled under the weight of her despair. "Sorry won't save us. We have nothing. Nothing." Her voice cracked, the desperation spilling out as she clutched at her hair. I straightened in my chair, my gaze sweeping over all three of them. You thought I was powerless. You thought I was too old, too quiet, too weak to fight back. But Richard knew better. He built this fortress not only for me, but against you. He knew storms would come, and now here we are. The silence that followed was thick, broken only by the sound of the ocean faintly beyond the windows. Rossi stood suddenly, pushing his chair back with a scrape. I don't deal in lost causes, he muttered. He pointed at Nathan and Vanessa, his voice low and dangerous. You two are done. Don't ever come near me again. With that, he strode out of the room, the door slamming behind him. Vanessa collapsed into her chair, sobbing openly now, her mask shattered. Nathan reached for her hand, but she pulled away, her body shaking. They were two broken figures, stripped of illusion, left with nothing but their choices. Ms. Delgado gathered the papers neatly, her expression professional but tinged with satisfaction. It's over, Mrs. Montgomery. The mansion is secure, the trust stands. They have no claim. Justice has been served. I nodded, my voice quiet. Justice, yes, but not without cost. I looked at my son, my only child, who could not even meet my gaze. Nathan, you lost more than property today. You lost my trust, and that is harder to rebuild than any house. His tears fell freely, his shoulders trembling. I know, and I don't deserve it back. But I'll spend the rest of my life trying. I didn't answer. Some wounds required time, and others never healed at all. As I stood to leave, Vanessa lifted her face, streaked with tears, and whispered, Why didn't you destroy me when you had the chance? You could have. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I said, Because revenge that leaves nothing but ashes teaches nothing. But dignity teaches everything. I turned and walked out, the weight of the moment pressing behind me, but the sea breeze outside lifting my heart. The storm had broken. The truth had been revealed, and though my family lay in pieces, my dignity, my fortress, remained untouched. The law office felt smaller when I returned the following day, though perhaps it was not the room that had changed. It was me. The storm that had shaken my family had broken at last, leaving behind debris that could not be swept away in a single night. As I stepped inside, the silence of the place pressed on me. Ms. Delgado greeted me with her usual firm composure, yet I could sense in her eyes the recognition that yesterday had altered the course of everything. I sat across from her once more, and she slid a cup of coffee toward me. The trust is safe, she said, repeating words I already knew. The mansion, the jewels, every asset your husband shielded for you, all protected. Rossi has backed down, at least for now. Your daughter-in-law has no claim, and your son, she hesitated. He will need time to face what he's done. I nodded slowly, the weight of her words settling into my chest. Time. That was all any of us had left. What happens now? I asked quietly. That depends on you, she replied. You hold the power, Mrs. Montgomery, not just the property, not just the wealth. You hold the choice. Do you cut them off entirely? Do you let them drown in the consequences of their actions? Or do you offer them a chance to rebuild? Her question lingered like the smell of rain after a storm. I left the office with no answer, the streets of Charleston buzzing around me, life carrying on as though nothing monumental had happened. But inside, I carried the knowledge that nothing would ever be the same again. When I returned to the mansion, Nathan was waiting. He stood on the porch, his shoulders bent, his eyes swollen from lack of sleep. For a moment, I simply looked at him, remembering him as a boy, how he once ran barefoot along these same steps, chasing fireflies on summer nights, how Richard had lifted him onto his shoulders to watch fireworks over the ocean. The boy was gone, but pieces of him still lingered in the man before me. "Mom," he said, his voice hoarse, "please, hear me out." I opened the door and stepped aside. He entered slowly as though unsure if he belonged. We sat in the parlor, the same room where Richard and I had once shared quiet evenings, the room that now felt haunted by absence. Nathan leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped tight. "I was blind," he said. "I let her control me. I let her words drown out yours. I wanted so badly to believe in the life she promised that I ignored the truth. I ignored you, and I see it now clearer than ever. I betrayed you. I betrayed Dad. I betrayed myself." His voice cracked, and he pressed a trembling hand to his face. "I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm begging for a chance to make it right. I'll work. I'll earn my way back. I'll do anything you ask." I studied him in silence, my heart torn between sorrow and love. He was my son. No matter what he had done, the bond of blood could not be erased. Yet love without boundaries is not love. It is surrender. "Do you remember what your father used to say about storms?" I asked softly. Nathan looked up, confusion flickering across his face. "He said storms reveal the strength of what they strike. Weak trees fall. Strong ones bend but do not break. This storm revealed you, Nathan. It showed me how easily you bent to the wind. But bending does not mean breaking. If you truly wish to change, then you must grow strong again. Not for me, not even for your father, for yourself." Tears spilled down his cheeks. He nodded slowly, as though clutching to my words like a lifeline. "I will, Mom. I swear I will." I leaned back in my chair, the ache in my chest both heavy and relieving. "I will give you the chance," I said at last, "but it will not be easy. You must work. You must prove, not just say. Words are air, Nathan. Only actions endure." He bowed his head, gratitude etched across his face. For the first time in years, I saw humility in him, and perhaps that was the beginning of redemption. Later that evening, Vanessa appeared. She had been staying in the guest room still, her presence in the house like a shadow. When she entered the parlor, Nathan stiffened, but she ignored him, turning instead to me. Her voice was quiet, stripped of its former venom. "I know there's nothing I can say that will erase what I did," she began. "But I want you to know, I see now what I lost. I see now what I threw away. I can't undo it. I can't fix it. But I am asking for mercy. Not for jewels, not for houses, not for wealth, just mercy." I regarded her with steady eyes. "Mercy does not erase consequences, Vanessa. You will live with what you've done. But mercy means I will not let hatred consume me. You may start again, but not under this roof. You must find your own way. Only then will you understand what dignity means." She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. For once, she did not argue. She turned and left the room quietly, her footsteps fading into the halls. The mansion was silent after she was gone, the only sound the waves outside, constant and eternal. I sat in the parlor long into the night, the flicker of the lamp casting shadows on the walls. My family was broken, but not beyond repair. Nathan had been given a chance. Vanessa had been cast into the world to face herself, and I remained, standing within the fortress Richard had built, holding the dignity they had tried to steal. As the clock struck midnight, I rose and walked to the balcony. The sea stretched before me, vast and unyielding, its waves glowing silver in the moonlight. I whispered into the wind, "It's not about houses or jewels. It's about dignity. And that, Richard, we have kept." The waves answered, crashing against the shore, and I knew he heard me. The days after the confrontation passed quietly, though the silence carried a different weight now. It was no longer the silence of grief or betrayal, but of rebuilding. The mansion itself seemed to breathe easier, as if the walls recognized that justice had been restored. Yet as I moved through its rooms, I knew it could not remain just my fortress. It had to become something more. I spent mornings walking through each corridor, touching the polished wood banisters, pausing before the portraits Richard had hung, and listening to the endless song of the ocean. Every corner of the house carried echoes of what had happened. Conversations with Nathan, confrontations with Vanessa, moments of quiet despair that had nearly broken me. This place had been a stage for suffering, but it could become a sanctuary for others. The thought lingered, refusing to fade. One afternoon, Eleanor arrived from Chicago. My sister walked into the house with her usual calm presence, the string of pearls around her neck glinting softly in the light. She embraced me, holding me tighter than usual. "I've been following the news," she said gently. "I know more than you think. Word spreads fast in families, even when we try to contain it." I led her to the sitting room where we shared tea, the ocean breeze drifting in through open windows. She listened as I told her everything, from Vanessa's phone call in the doctor's office to the vault of jewels, the showdown in Ms. Delgado's conference room, and finally Nathan's broken plea for forgiveness. When I finished, Eleanor sighed, her eyes full of both sorrow and admiration. "You survived the storm," she said softly, "but you didn't let it turn you cruel. That's what matters." Her words settled in my heart. For so long I had feared that revenge would consume me, that my silence would rot into bitterness. But instead, it had carried me to something else: clarity. Later, I invited Mr. Green, my neighbor and the retired judge, for supper. He had been a quiet supporter through it all, offering advice when I needed it most. That evening, he sat at the head of my long dining table, his posture straight, his sharp eyes softened by candlelight. "You've done what courts rarely can," he told me between bites of roast chicken. "You turned betrayal into a lesson rather than a weapon. That's rarer than you know." I smiled faintly. But the question remains, what do I do now? I cannot simply live here alone, counting jewels and deeds, waiting for the tide to take me too. He leaned back, folding his hands. "What do you want the house to mean when you're gone?" The question struck me like a bell. I looked around the table, at the empty chairs where family should have been. Then I looked toward the sea, its vastness visible through the tall windows. The answer formed quietly but firmly. "I want it to stand for dignity," I said. "For women who have been told they are nothing, for mothers abandoned, for wives betrayed, for daughters cast aside. I want it to be a place where silence is not weakness, but strength." Eleanor reached for my hand across the table, her eyes shining. "Then that's what it will be." In the weeks that followed, the idea grew into action. Ms. Delgado drew up papers, her sharp pen translating my vision into legal reality. Together we established the Montgomery Women's Center, a foundation dedicated to helping women who had suffered financial exploitation, abuse, or abandonment. The mansion would become its home, each room repurposed not just for memory, but for healing. We walked the halls together, Eleanor, Green, and I, mapping out what each space would become. Richard's study would serve as the legal aid office where Ms. Delgado and her colleagues could counsel women about their rights. The large dining hall would become a community room where stories could be shared and dignity restored over meals. Upstairs bedrooms would offer temporary refuge to those with nowhere else to go. Even the garden, once tended by Richard's careful hands, would be a sanctuary where women could plant and nurture life anew. The transformation was not immediate, but it was steady. Contractors came, plans were drawn, donations trickled in from allies who believed in the mission. I supervised everything with a quiet determination, pouring my grief into purpose. The mansion, once a symbol of betrayal, was becoming a beacon of resilience. Nathan visited once during those weeks. He stood awkwardly in the doorway, watching the activity. "You're turning it into something bigger," he said quietly. "Dad would be proud." I looked at him, my heart both heavy and hopeful. "What matters now is what you do with your life, Nathan. Pride must be earned, not borrowed." He nodded, shame and determination mingling in his expression. He promised to start over, to work honestly for the first time in years. Whether he would succeed, only time would tell. But at least he was beginning. Vanessa, on the other hand, did not return. I heard through whispers that she had left Charleston, perhaps searching for a place to rebuild. Part of me pitied her, but I knew the path she walked would be long and lonely. She had chosen it, and she would have to live it. The day the Montgomery Women's Center opened, the mansion felt alive again. Women from the community filled the rooms, their laughter and tears echoing off the walls. Some came with children in their arms, others with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Each one carried a story of betrayal, and each one found in those walls the dignity that had been stolen from them. As I stood in the foyer, watching them step across the threshold, I felt Richard's presence stronger than ever. He had built this house for me, but now it stood for so much more. It was no longer just a fortress. It was a lighthouse, guiding the broken toward safe harbor. That evening, Eleanor Green and Ms. Delgado joined me on the balcony. The sun dipped into the horizon, painting the sky in shades of fire and gold. The ocean roared below, powerful and eternal. "You've turned pain into purpose," Eleanor said, her hand resting on my shoulder. "That is the truest kind of victory." I nodded, my eyes on the waves. True wealth isn't in millions. It's in dignity, respect, and love. And this house will carry that message long after I'm gone. The ocean wind swept through my hair, carrying the scent of salt and roses. I closed my eyes, letting the sound of the waves fill me. For the first time in years, I felt peace. Not the silence of defeat, but the silence of strength fulfilled. The morning after the Women's Center opened, I woke earlier than usual. The mansion felt different, filled with new sounds and energy. From my room, I could hear the muffled laughter of children in one of the upstairs bedrooms, the low murmur of voices in the kitchen where volunteers had already begun preparing breakfast, and the rhythmic sweep of a broom on the downstairs floor. The house was alive again, not with the shallow noise of greed or arrogance, but with the hum of purpose. I rose slowly, wrapping a shawl around my shoulders, and moved to the balcony. The ocean stretched out endlessly before me, its surface silvered by the rising sun. For 71 years I had lived beside this water, and still it amazed me. It had carried my joy, witnessed my grief, and stood unshaken when storms threatened to tear everything away. And now it bore witness to renewal. As I stood there, the memory of Richard came to me, vivid and strong. I remembered the way he used to stand at this very spot, his arms folded, his eyes on the horizon. "The sea teaches us everything," he once told me. "Patience, resilience, humility. And most of all, it teaches us that no storm lasts forever." I smiled through tears, whispering into the wind, "You were right, Richard. You always were." Later that morning, I joined the women in the dining hall. The long table that had once hosted family dinners was now covered with mismatched plates, steaming coffee pots, and bowls of fruit. Women sat together, sharing stories in quiet voices. Some spoke of husbands who had abandoned them, others of children who had turned cold, others still of debts and betrayals that had driven them to despair. As I listened, I felt my own story reflected in theirs. Betrayal wears many faces, but the wound is always the same. I stood at the head of the table, clearing my throat gently. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to me. My heart pounded, but my voice was steady. "Welcome," I said. "This house was once a place of pride, then a place of pain. Now it belongs to all of us. It is a place where dignity is restored, where voices are heard, where silence is no longer mistaken for weakness. You are safe here. You are not alone." The women nodded, some with tears in their eyes. One young mother reached for my hand as I passed by, whispering, "Thank you." In that moment, I felt more wealth than any jewel in Richard's vault could ever bring. That afternoon, Eleanor joined me in the garden. She knelt beside me as we planted roses along the stone path, her laughter light as the wind carried the scent of earth and salt. "Do you realize what you've done?" she asked, wiping soil from her hands. "You turned betrayal into a sanctuary. Not many people can claim that kind of victory." I paused, pressing a rose into the soil. "It doesn't feel like victory," I admitted softly. "It feels like healing. And healing is quieter, slower, but deeper." She touched my arm. "That's the kind of victory that lasts." As the days passed, Nathan came again. This time, he did not come with excuses or pleas for money. He came with calloused hands and humble words. He offered to help repair a section of the roof that had weathered too many storms, to paint the shutters that were peeling, to mow the lawn. He worked quietly, side by side with volunteers, his head bowed, his voice low. He did not ask for forgiveness. He tried to earn it. One evening, as the sun dipped low, I found him sitting on the porch steps, sweat on his brow, dirt on his shirt. He looked up at me, his eyes searching. "I know it'll take more than paint and nails," he said softly. "But I'm trying, Mom." I sat beside him, the wood warm beneath us. For a long while, we watched the waves without speaking. Then I placed my hand gently over his. "Trying is the first step, Nathan. But don't try for me. Try for yourself. Be the man your father believed you could be." His eyes filled with tears, but he nodded, gripping my hand as if to anchor himself. As for Vanessa, word came weeks later that she had moved north, working as a receptionist in a small firm. She had not called, not written, not returned. I did not know if she would ever face me again. Part of me hoped she would find the strength to rebuild. Another part accepted that some stories end with distance rather than reconciliation. The mansion, meanwhile, blossomed with life. The Women's Center grew beyond what I had dreamed. Volunteers filled the halls, children played in the gardens, lawyers like Ms. Delgado offered counsel in the study that had once been Richard's private sanctuary. The dining hall rang with laughter, the bedrooms gave shelter to women who had nowhere else to go, and the ocean outside seemed to sing louder, proud of the transformation it witnessed. One evening, standing on the balcony with Eleanor and Mr. Usher Green, I spoke aloud the words that had been circling in my heart. "True wealth isn't counted in millions," I said, my eyes on the horizon. "It's measured in dignity, respect, and love. And this house will stand as proof of that long after I'm gone." Mr. Green nodded, his weathered face breaking into a small smile. "And long after you're gone, Lydia, people will still speak your name, not as a victim, but as a woman who turned betrayal into strength." Eleanor squeezed my hand. "That is the legacy Richard wanted, and you fulfilled it." The waves crashed below us, endless, eternal, and I knew they would continue long after I was gone. But in that moment, I felt at peace. As I looked into the camera of memory, the faceless eye that would carry this story to others, I spoke with the quiet conviction that only truth can bring. I was betrayed, I was cast aside, but I was not broken. The mansion they tried to steal became the fortress that saved me, and now it has become a lighthouse for others. If you have ever felt abandoned, if you have ever been told you are weak, remember this: storms end, silence is power, and dignity cannot be sold. It can only be lived. I let the words linger, my eyes fixed on the sea. Then I smiled, a small but certain smile. The waves answered with their eternal rhythm, and the story closed. Not with ashes, but with light. Thank you so much for listening. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe and tell me in the comments if you liked my story. See you in the next life story. With love and respect, peacefully.